How's it going, guys? Looks like there's a lot of problems in the financial sector still. So you know that the shit hits the fan when the branches are calling the cops, preventing customers from getting their money out. Silicon Valley SVB Bank basically blew up. It collapsed. They got taken over by the federal government. They got shut down and their assets are frozen. On top of that, the branches are actually calling the cops on people trying to get their money out. To make matters worse, and this is why people just abhor, detest banks, because it is so insulting. The CEO of SVB Bank, he sold $3.57 million worth of bank stock before this whole collapse. But now the customers can't get their money out. And they're getting the cops called out on them, thrown at them. How messed up is that? Here's a picture of some guys that were trying to get their money out. And because of this, because of SVB Bank, $52 billion combined were lost in the biggest four major banks of the US. That's a lot of money. Now, Silicon Valley's Manhattan branch apparently reports about a dozen financiers, including former Lyft executives, showed up outside the building on Park Avenue in Manhattan as a run, basically to get their funds out of the bank they could not access. Not only that, they were kicked out of the building. They got the cops called on them. There's also the story of Ashley Turner, CEO of Boston wellness firm Farmbox RX. She said she had about $10 million deposited with SVB Bank. She now has zero access to her money. On top of that, the representatives of the bank basically have ignored her calls, her emails, not even a text message, she says. And the other crazy part is FDIC only insures up to $250,000. So this Ashley CEO, she stands to lose all of her money, where she goes on to talk about contacting her personal banker. And then eventually he stopped answering her phone calls. He wouldn't answer the phone. On top of that, wouldn't even reply to the text messages. So the FDIC rushed to freeze the assets because there was a huge bank run. Now a lot of people are going to say, well, SVB Bank, who cares? Nobody knows about them. Well, that's actually not true. It's the 16th largest bank in the US by assets. On top of that, it's huge when it comes to financing a lot of startups, a lot of tech companies, tech startup, with around $209 billion in assets. And get this, over $175 billion in deposits. And that's the stuff that's going to get frozen. With all this money frozen, it actually represents the largest bank freeze, bank failure and collapse explosion since Washington Mutual back in 2008. Crazy recession that happened there. So the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank, he sold $3.57 million worth of stock January 26th. On top of that, the CFO of the bank ditched over $500,000 in stock on the same day as the CEO. Absolutely insanity. And of course, this is right before the whole collapse, that the stock was actually worth something. At the time he sold was about $290 per share, and today it is... All the assets of the bank were frozen today by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. Here's a picture of these two clowns that basically ripped off not only the company, but of course, the customers. So obviously insider information, and this allows the CEO, CFO to screw everyone else over. This is why Main Street hates Wall Street. This is why the whole Occupy Wall Street happened to begin with. I think Occupy Wall Street was kind of framed, Everyone was against them. And even though financial institutions are totally necessary for everyday transactions, but the problem is these people are too big to fail. Well, guess what? They get bailed out. They recorded record profits when the banks got bailed out, but the guy on Main Street gets screwed over. On top of that, where does all this bail money come from for these financial institutions? Well, it comes from the taxpayer. It comes from the money printers. And what does that do? That makes the dollar used on Main Street worth even less. That's the problem. Big, big problem. Anyways, the last time the CEO sold stock actually was in 2021, December 2021. He clearly knew something was happening in March, and well, he bailed. He bailed and scored a few $1 million right before the collapse. Because of the so-called sudden collapse, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen convened an emergency meeting with top banking regulators. They're afraid that this is going to lead to other basically bank failures. And of course, Silvergate just collapsed as well, where these people just put way too much money into the volatile crypto market. So what does this mean? It means that financial institutions in the United States are very fragile, partially because, of course, inflation, and some others because of the FTX scam contagion that has happened. Now, funny enough, some so-called financial gurus were actually saying that SVB Bank was one of the big winners, one of the big market winners for 2023. And this includes the shill, Jim Cramer. Let's check out this little quick video.
The ninth best performer year to date is SVB Financial. Don't yawn. This company's a merchant bank with a deposit base that Wall Street had been mistakenly concerned about. Pools of capital has always been a very good business. Stock's still cheap. So you could argue SVB's nearly 40% rally this year is barely a drop in the bucket. And that's how I want you to think it. These stocks could have more room to run.
Shills all over the place. This is why people don't trust banks. Some people say Bitcoin fixes this, but the reality is it's more complicated than that, and certainly crypto is not fixing this. Some say that the increase in interest rates is actually hurting the infusion of cash, basically funny money, by the government into these banks. An example is billionaire hedge funder Bill Ackman. He called for the government to bail out SVB Bank. He said because the bank collapsing would actually hurt the greater economy. That may or may not be true, but of course it could create a domino effect. But man, people hate not being able to access their money, especially if you have a company. How are you going to pay your employees? This is why you don't keep all your eggs in one basket. But anyways, guys, check out this other video dealing with money. But for now, thanks for watching. Smash the like if you haven't. Please do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
Maybach music. Can anybody out there